Writer and aviator Anne Spencer Morrow was born on June 22, 1906.
I began these pages for myself in order to think out my own individual balance of life. And since I think best with a pencil in my hand, I started naturally to write.
Okay, girls, I sure hope you laid some eggs. Well, what do you know? Okay, it's good. It's not bad. Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. We got a few. That little house, I think she probably wrote and reshaped her gift from the sea in there. She would go out and write in diaries because that was where she knew she could be alone and we wouldn't bother her. She hadn't used it for years before she died. It seems to me we've got a wasp nest somewhere in there. Yes, we do. And I'm just going to pretend it isn't there. That's the desk. She did use it and did love it. She just sat with her little pad and used it. This is the one. There we go. When she got too old, too fragile really, to travel to Europe, we had the house built here on the property and she died here in this house. This was my mother's room when she lived here. And this was one of the desks, one of her desks.
Captiva, Friday, March 5th, 1948. Who knows what these great rollers may turn up on the white sand of the conscious mind, a rose murex or a lion's paw. But it must not be sought for, or heaven forbid, dug for. No, one should lie bare, open, flat as an empty white beach, waiting for a gift from the sea.
Anne Morrow met Charles Lindbergh in December of 1927 when she was a 21-year-old college senior.
His plane tested and flown from San Diego to New York without mishap. Charles Lindbergh watched it being towed, dripping wet in the early morning rain. The oversized tanks in wings, nose, and fuselage were filled with fuel. Final interviews were held, last-minute pictures snapped. Twice its wheels left the ground, only to return. And then the plane was airborne. On May 20th, 1927, 3,600 miles to Paris. Safely on the ground, he had barely cut the engine when the crowd reached the plane. They shouted his name over and over again, Lindbergh, Lindbergh.
My mother and father met in Mexico the Christmas after my father's flight to Paris in 1927. And he was in Mexico for Christmas, invited by my mother's father, the ambassador to Mexico. So my father came at his invitation with his mother, came to Mexico and met my mother and ready, God help us, for him. He liked, I think, her spunk.
The couple soon fell in love and married 2 years later. Anne soon became her husband's co-pilot and radio operator. The couple's flights across oceans and around the world fascinated the American public.
Into the cockpit of his Lockheed Sirius climbs Colonel Charles Lindbergh. Mrs. Lindbergh is with him. Flying together, as always, they are heading from Washington, D.C., across the Bering Sea to Japan. A perfect landing after almost half the world has rolled by beneath their wings. Cheers and waving flags as Tokyo greets them.
In 1930, she became the first American woman to get a glider's pilot's license.
Captiva, March 13th, 1950. Dear Land, today our rented bicycles came on the mailboat. We found them leaning against a banyan tree by the post office.
Anne Morrow Lindbergh scored an immense literary success with her 1955 book, Gift from the Sea. It was on the nonfiction bestseller list of the New York Times for 80 weeks and was #1 for 47 of those weeks.
It is a curious island, not a bit like the rest of Florida. I feel it has a spell on it. It is curiously, almost humorously, possibly even dangerously uninhibiting. One sinks into natural rhythms. One is even forced into them willy-nilly. The pounding of the sea. One cannot resist giving in to it.
They got to know Captiva through the Newtons, Jim and Ellie Newton, and I think Captiva was the place that she had asked Jim to find her, where she could go and write. And he did, and that was the little house where she wrote the book. That was just for her, although my father did come. He not only came, but he brought several of the children to see her on Captiva.
Captiva Island, 1951. The other day I stepped backwards on a rickety pier through a hole in the planks. I escaped with only a skinned leg. Con and I will now pedal up to the post office and collect groceries. We look like a French bicycle race in our shorts and shirts and jockey caps.
When you read her diaries, you realize that this quiet time that she had was quite frequently broken into by family and friends. The retreat quality of that time was intermittent, but the quality of that time was extremely important for her writing.
I lay under the stars alone. I made my breakfast alone. Alone, I watched the gulls at the end of the pier dip and wheel from the broken bread I threw them. And it seemed to me that I was nearer to others in their aloneness. The sandpiper running in little unfrightened steps down the shining beach rim, the old gull hunched up, grouchy, surveying the sea. I walked way down the beach, drugged by the rhythm of the waves, until I felt really quite drunk with it. I went into the waves with nothing on, and then came home, drenched, drugged, full to the brim with my day alone, curiously whole for my aloneness. It has brought me to realize that the cure for loneliness is solitude.
Cure for loneliness is solitude. I think it's hers, and that's very, very much like my mother. Of course, I disagreed heartily. I thought the cure for loneliness is love. What is the matter? We don't take those silent times enough. They're very important. Silence is really, really important. Of course, I never shut up, do I?
Like love, it has been beautiful. Now I feel well. Early morning swims, nights under a cupful of stars. By the end of March, there will be scarcely anyone except the islanders who are so very nice. I feel like the full moon before the night has taken a single nibble of it.
Captiva meant privacy and freedom and a kind of refreshment to my mother. It meant something all her own.
It could, I suppose, be sinister and dangerous to live so sensuously, but one feels in Captiva a kind of purity about it. One sinks into childhood, clean as a piece of driftwood and left on the beach. One becomes bare, empty, open as a shell.
That is what the experience was. It was a washing, cleansing, refreshing, and there was always flow to it and movement and the tides. And of course she refers to all that in her book. And you feel it as you read. You feel rhythm, the rhythm of that book. The oyster shell is the family. Well, I think contemplation when I look at the moon shell. I think the shells were very important to her. This would be the marriage, yeah. So this is a beauty, yeah. This I think is my favorite. I like the mystery.
The shell is certainly the symbol for Captiva, filled with salt and sand and sun and the rhythm of the sea. But is there not a terrible lack of responsibility in living in the present? But for short periods, it is permitted, even vital.
Gift from the Sea has got this power to it. I do think it's timeless, but why this particular book when she wrote so many? And she had some wonderful things to say.
The only form of materialism here, the wealth, so to speak, is counted in seashells, and one becomes, almost against one's will, a child.
She herself was, as a woman who could speak for other women. A lot of women say that she's talking to me, and she did.
Captiva, March 13th, 1950. Dear John, Evie Ames and I have just chased an enormous spider out of the house, big and furry, about the circumference of a grapefruit. Also, the woman next door found 4 palmetto rats in 4 bureau drawers.
It's a very musical book, as well as very wise and spiritual and very practical and simple. And it all goes together in this one very small package.
With Gift from the Sea, Anne became a hero to millions of readers for her thoughtful and lyrical meditation on the lives of women in the 20th century.
I did an introduction, but I would have liked it even without my introduction.
Seriously?
I promise.
Anne Morrow Lindbergh died on February 7th, 2001, in her home in Vermont at the age of 94. Living on Captiva is to experience an accident of temporary confinement in which only a few fortunate souls are ever selected.